The courtroom smelled like copy paper and burnt coffee. Monday dressed as justice. Marcus Reed sat on the hard wooden bench with a manila folder in his lap, the edges softened by weeks of handling. Inside were pay stubs, photographs, and a handwritten timeline. All the things he'd been told a judge would need to understand why he, a warehouse supervisor and Army veteran, had filed a simple civil complaint against a developer that bulldozed his mother's garden without permits. He wasn't a lawyer. He didn't know the language. But he knew what was right. Across the aisle, Clifford Hale did know the language. He wore it like armor, a navy suit cut like a threat, cufflinks that flashed when he gestured, a smirk he didn't bother to hide. Hale represented the developer. Everyone in this courthouse knew him, his swagger, his win record, the way he treated pro se defendants like gum on polished floors. Some said he was old school. Marcus had another word for it. "Mr. Reed," Hale called from the counsel table, voice pitched to carry, "you do understand you can avoid wasting everyone's time. Withdraw your complaint, sign a liability waiver, and we can all go home." Marcus straightened. "I'm not withdrawing. You tore down private property. You don't get to call that a landscaping mistake." The clerk, Rosa, lifted a finger without looking up from her monitor. "Counsel, Mr. Reed, save it for the record. Judge is running 5 minutes behind. No arguing until the bench is occupied." Hale ignored her. He rose, approaching with a leisurely stroll that felt like a slow storm. "Let me translate for you, Mr. Reed," he said, lowering his voice to a confidential sneer. "Courts are expensive. People who come in here with homemade folders and wounded pride usually leave with court costs and a lesson learned." Marcus held his gaze. "Maybe the lesson is for you." A couple of spectators, employees from Hale's client, snickered behind polished shoes and department store ties. The bailiff, Sergeant Klein, adjusted his belt and pretended to study a laminated evacuation plan. Rosa sighed, tapped her keyboard, and sent an urgent message to Chambers. Hale leaned closer, the peppermint on his breath doing nothing to sweeten his tone. "You know the difference between me and you? I don't confuse slogans for evidence. I don't confuse feelings for facts. You confuse power for permission," Marcus said evenly. His voice wasn't loud, but it hit its mark. "You think nobody will check you because you talk louder." Hale's smile thinned. The room seemed to tilt toward them, attention gathering like static. "Last chance to do the smart thing," he said. "Already doing it," Marcus replied. Hale's jaw flexed. "You people never learn." Rosa's head snapped up. Klein finally turned. "Counsel," he warned. Hale's face brightened with something ugly. He stepped in, too fast for talk to catch up, and his shoulder cracked into Marcus's chest. The folder slipped. Papers fanned across the floor. Marcus stumbled back, spine colliding with the pew. Gasps flared. One of the developer reps laughed out loud, then swallowed it when Klein barked, "Hey!" Marcus put his palms up, steady, refusing to give the room what it waited for. "Back off," he said, breath tight. Hale didn't. He swatted at Marcus's hand, a sharp slap meant to humiliate, then cocked his fist and drove it forward. A short, mean punch that caught Marcus high on the cheekbone and snapped his head sideways. The sound, a dull, stunned thud, stole the oxygen from the room. Rosa screamed, "Bailiff!" Klein surged, one hand going to Hale's shoulder, the other moving toward cuffs he wasn't sure he was allowed to use on a lawyer whose name decorated plaques in the lobby. The door to Chambers flew open. A woman in black strode through the frame with the force of someone who belonged there. Not a full robe. She wore a judge's jacket, the front open over a crisp blouse, sleeves pushed past her wrists as if she'd been grading motions and rolled them up to get it done. A leather portfolio was tucked under one arm. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes sharp, taking in the scatter of papers, the stunned faces, the bailiff with his half-drawn authority. "What," she said, voice carrying like a gavel, "is happening in my courtroom?" Silence reset the room. Even Hale froze, hands still half raised as if he'd thrown the punch and time had refused to move on. Klein found his voice. "Judge, there was an—" She didn't look at him. Her eyes tracked from Marcus's swelling cheek to the splayed folder at his feet, then to Hale's clenched fist. Her posture changed by degrees, from alert to appalled, from appalled to cold. "Counselor," she said. "Step back." Hale's mouth worked. He took a step, then another, instinctively obeying the voice he'd spent a career trying to impress or manipulate. "Your Honor, there's been a misunderstanding. This man became aggressive. Rosa stood, finger stabbing the air. That is a lie. He hit him. The judge's gaze cut to Klein. Sergeant, detain Mr. Hale, now. The bailiff hesitated the way a man does when his training meets the edge of his nerve. Judge, that's Counselor Hale. And he just committed an assault in open court, she said, not raising her voice because she didn't need to. He is in contempt. He is a danger in this moment. Put him in cuffs. Klein moved. Hale jerked back, outrage flaring. You can't cuff me? Do you know who I am? I'll have your badge and her… The judge stepped closer, the black of her jacket swallowing the space between them. I know exactly who you are, she said. There was something in the way she said it, an old knowledge, personal and precise, that made the room lean in. And you do not get to decide which laws apply to you. Not here. Klein's cuffs clicked. The sound was small but final, the end of a story Hale thought he controlled. Marcus touched his cheek, feeling the heat rising in a bright, pulsing ache. He watched the woman in black cross to him. Up close, she looked younger than her title and older than her years, eyes that had read too many transcripts, shoulders that knew what weight felt like. Are you hurt? She asked, voice gentler now. I'll be okay, Marcus said. Thank you, Judge. Her gaze flicked to his scattered papers. She crouched, an actual judge crouched, gathering photographs of a garden, a deed, a letter with his mother's looping script. She stacked them carefully and handed the folder back. Hale, she called without looking at him, you are under arrest for assault and held in direct contempt. You will be presented to a judge for arraignment within 24 hours. You will not speak to Mr. Reed. You will not speak to anyone in this courtroom except through counsel. Sergeant, remove him. Hale sputtered, eyes bulging. This is outrageous. You don't even sit this docket. You're… The judge finally looked at him full on, and something like recognition cracked the surface. For a blink, the room saw it. A father's features reflected in a daughter's steadier face. Judge Hale, Rosa whispered, awe soaking her voice. Judge Ava Hale. A murmur rippled. Ava Hale. The youngest judge appointed to the county bench in a generation. The reformer people argued about on talk radio and quoted on Sunday shows. Wearing a judge's jacket, standing over a man in cuffs who shared her last name. Hale went white. Ava. The judge didn't flinch. Bailiff, she said, never taking her eyes off him, remove the defendant from my courtroom. Klein led him away, the door swallowing his protests. Judge Ava Hale turned back to Marcus, to Rosa, to the gallery whose breath had been trapped under shock. She exhaled, setting her portfolio on the bench as if planting a flag. This court, she said, voice steady, is now in session. The room had never been that silent. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to vanish as Judge Ava Hale settled behind the bench, black jacket flowing like the mantle of authority it was meant to be. She didn't slam a gavel, she didn't need to. Her presence was weight enough. Marcus sat back down, clutching the manila folder she'd handed him. His cheeks still throbbed from Clifford Hale's punch, but his eyes stayed on the judge. He caught it again, that flicker of something personal when she looked at the man in cuffs. He hadn't misheard Rosa. Judge Ava Hale. Daughter. Rosa busied herself with typing the events into the digital record, her fingers shaking only slightly. Sergeant Klein stood near the doorway, Hale secured but still sputtering as if words could rewrite reality. This is absurd, Clifford barked. You don't have jurisdiction. Ava's eyes cut to him, and he quieted like a boy scolded in church. Mr. Hale, she said evenly, you just committed an act of violence in a courtroom. Your jurisdiction is the holding cell until arraignment. Sit down. The bailiff pushed him into a chair along the wall. Ava then turned to Marcus. Mr. Reed, please approach the bench. Marcus hesitated. He wasn't used to being addressed with that kind of formal respect. Standing slowly, he carried the folder like it was both evidence and shield. When he reached the bench, Ava leaned forward slightly. I'm aware this wasn't your assigned hearing, she said quietly. Judge Mercer was delayed. I came down because the clerk's message suggested the situation was escalating. I didn't expect… She glanced at Clifford, then back to Marcus. Are you well enough to continue? Marcus touched his cheekbone, swelling now like a hot coin under his skin. I'm fine, he said. I just want my case heard. Something softened in Ava's eyes. And it will be. She signaled Rosa. Mark today's record. Civil complaint, Reed Version Westfield Development, docket reassigned to Judge Hale. Proceed. Rosa's eyebrows lifted slightly. This was unusual, but she typed it without objection. Marcus set his folder on the bench. Your Honor, I filed this complaint because the company Mr. Hale represents demolished my mother's garden. It wasn't just flowers, it was her livelihood. She grew vegetables, herbs. She sold them at the farmer's market. I have photos, dated receipts, even the city's permit map that shows they didn't have clearance. He spoke steadily, each word shaped by weeks of frustration. The folder opened to reveal proof, glossy photographs of a lush yard, rows of tomatoes, baskets of peppers. Then new photos, bare dirt, tire tracks, a bulldozer in the corner of the frame. Ava studied them closely. This was done without notice? Yes, Marcus said. Came home from work and it was gone. Hale here told me it was an easement issue, but the county said otherwise. That's why I'm here. Across the room, Clifford strained against the cuffs. This is nonsense. The man's exaggerating a patch of weeds, and you, of all people, Ava, should know better than to— Enough, she snapped, louder than before. The use of his first name made the room tilt. You'll have counsel appointed if you wish to speak further. For now, you are a defendant like any other. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Marcus glanced at Rosa, who mouthed silently, "Daughter, judge's daughter." It clicked. Clifford Hale wasn't just any lawyer. He was her father. Marcus's stomach churned. The man who had belittled him, struck him, laughed at him, that was the father of the woman now holding the bench. Would she recuse herself? Could she? But Ava pressed on, voice unwavering. Mr. Reed, your documents will be entered into evidence. The court recognizes your standing as plaintiff. The matter of damages will be reviewed once the defense has provided counter-evidence, should they be capable of doing so. Clifford barked a bitter laugh. Capable? You're really going to humiliate me like this in public? Ava's gaze didn't flinch. You humiliated yourself. This court won't clean your mess. The gallery gasped again. During a recess, Marcus stepped into the hallway, leaning against the cool marble wall. His thoughts spun. He hadn't expected justice to look like this, a courtroom cracking open with family secrets. Maya, his younger sister, hurried up, having arrived late. Marcus, I saw the live stream. He hit you? He nodded, rubbing his cheek. Yeah, but it's bigger than that. The judge. He lowered his voice. She's his daughter. Maya's eyes widened. Wait, the lawyer's daughter? And she put him in cuffs? Yeah, Marcus said. And I don't know if that makes this case stronger or shakier. Inside chambers, Ava closed the door behind her, finally letting her shoulders sag. Clifford sat cuffed, eyes burning with humiliation. Ava, he said, softer now, you can't do this. You can't side with him. You're my daughter. Her jaw tightened. I'm also a judge, and you just hit a man in my courtroom. He provoked me. He stood his ground, Ava shot back. Something you never let anyone do. Not me, not your clients, not people like him. Clifford sneered. You're throwing away blood for a stranger's weeds. Ava stepped closer, voice like steel. I'm upholding the law. That's something you forgot how to do a long time ago. When recess ended, Ava returned to the bench, mask of composure back in place. Marcus watched her, unsure whether the tension in her shoulders meant conflict or clarity. All rise, Rosa intoned. The courtroom stood. Ava lifted her gavel, not slamming it, just letting the weight of it hover. This court will proceed, she said, and let the record show, justice does not pause for bloodlines. The gallery buzzed. Marcus sat down, folder in hand, realizing that the fight he thought was only about a garden had cracked open something much larger, the rot inside a family that had long ruled this courthouse. And for the first time, he believed he might actually win. The gallery was fuller now. News of Clifford Hale striking a plaintiff in open court had spread through the courthouse like wildfire. Attorneys from other cases slipped in, eager to witness the spectacle. Reporters, alerted by courthouse staff, hovered near the back with notepads ready. Marcus sat straighter, his manila folder in front of him like a shield. His cheek was still swollen, a faint red mark reminding everyone what had just unfolded. Across the aisle, Clifford sat cuffed, posture tense, his expensive suit wrinkled by the restraints. Judge Ava Hale returned to the bench, her face composed but her jaw set tight. She scanned the room, not with her father's smug superiority, but with a steady gaze that demanded silence. Court is back in session, Rosa announced. Ava leaned forward slightly. Mr. Reed, please continue with your evidence. Marcus stood, gripping the edges of the folder to steady his nerves. Yes, Your Honor. As I said, my mother's garden was more than flowers. She sold produce at the farmer's market every weekend. It paid bills after my father passed. I have records of her sales, along with witness statements from neighbors who saw the bulldozers come without warning. He pulled out a stack of photographs, color prints showing his mother's yard before and after. The before shots glowed with life, rows of tomatoes, peppers, squash, and herbs. The after shots were stark, dirt, tire tracks, the sharp edge of machinery cutting across the soil. The gallery shifted uncomfortably. The damage wasn't abstract, it was visible, undeniable. Marcus continued, his voice stronger now. The development company claimed it was an easement, but I have the city permit maps. He unfolded a large sheet, the official seal in the corner. This easement ends 10 feet before my mother's property. They went beyond it. They knew, and they still destroyed it. Ava examined the map carefully, then gestured for Rosa to mark it as Exhibit A. From his seat, Clifford snorted. Your Honor, we're really entertaining this? A grieving son waving photos and maps he barely understands? Ava's eyes snapped to him. Mr. Hale, you are not counsel today. You are a defendant under contempt. You will remain silent unless spoken to. The words landed like a hammer. Clifford's face reddened, but he pressed his lips shut. The gallery whispered, buzzing with disbelief. Clifford Hale, the courtroom shark, silenced by his own daughter. Marcus pulled out the final document. A letter. His voice faltered as he read, This is from my mom. She wrote it before she passed away last year. His eyes shimmered, but he pressed on. This garden is my sanctuary. When they bulldozed it, they didn't just take plants. They took my dignity. Promise me you'll make them answer. His throat tightened. The gallery grew still. Ava's expression softened, though her gavel remained steady. Thank you, Mr. Reed. Your mother's words will be entered into the record. Marcus sat down slowly, the weight of his promise to his mother now laid bare before everyone. During a recess, whispers filled the room. Spectators muttered, She has to recuse, he's her father. No, she's the only one strong enough to hear it. Imagine cuffing your own blood. Outside in the hallway, reporters clamored for details, cameras flashing as courthouse staff tried to push them back. Inside chambers, Ava faced Clifford directly. The door was shut, but Rosa lingered nearby, typing notes for the record. You've humiliated yourself, Ava said quietly. You think you're better than me because you wear a robe? Clifford spat. Everything you are, I gave you. The name, the education, the doors that opened, and this is how you repay me? By siding with some nobody? Ava didn't flinch. You gave me your name, yes, but you also gave me an example of everything I never wanted to become. I don't stand with Mr. Reed because I owe him. I stand with him because he's right. Clifford leaned forward, eyes narrowing. And what happens when word gets out that you presided over your own father's downfall? You think they'll call you impartial? They'll drag you down with me. Ava's jaw tightened. Then let them try. Better to fall for standing on truth than to rot while clinging to lies. When court resumed, Ava addressed the room. This court recognizes the plaintiff's evidence as credible and admissible. The defense will be given opportunity to respond once competent representation is established. Until then, Mr. Reed's complaint stands. Clifford erupted. You can't cut me out. I am the defense. No, Ava said firmly. You are the defendant, and you will be treated as such. Gasps rippled. Rosa's fingers flew across the keyboard, immortalizing every word. Marcus sat in quiet awe. He hadn't expected this. Justice delivered not with shouting or fists, but with calm, unshaken authority. Watching Ava, he saw not just a judge but a daughter severing herself from her father's corruption. For the first time since his mother's garden was torn apart, Marcus felt the ground shift in his favor, and he realized something bigger than his case was unfolding. This wasn't just about a garden anymore. It was about breaking the grip of power that had gone unchecked in that courthouse for far too long. That night, news outlets across the city ran the story. Headlines screamed, "Prominent lawyer arrested after assault in courtroom." Judge Ava Hale presides over case involving her father. Plaintiff's evidence shakes development giant. Clips of Marcus's quiet testimony and Ava's firm words spread online. On social media, people debated whether Ava was brave or compromised. But one line was repeated again and again. Justice does not pause for bloodlines. And with every share, every retweet, every headline, Clifford's empire cracked a little more. By the next morning, the courthouse steps looked more like a press staging ground than a civic building. Camera crews camped by the entrance, reporters holding microphones like weapons, eager for scraps of the story. A lawyer punching a plaintiff, a judge cuffing her own father. Marcus tried to slip in quietly, collar turned up against the wind and the flashes, but the reporters spotted him. "Mr. Reed, how does it feel to face off against one of the most powerful lawyers in the city? Do you think Judge Hale can stay impartial when the defendant is her father? Are you just using this case to make headlines?" Marcus kept walking, clutching his folder, his jaw tight. "I'm here for justice. That's it," he muttered, refusing to stop. Inside, Rosa met him at security. "You holding up?" He gave a humorless smile. "Better than yesterday." Meanwhile, in chambers, Ava sat at her desk, the weight of the robe heavy on her shoulders. She hadn't slept much. Her inbox was overflowing. Messages from colleagues, bar association officials, even members of the Judicial Ethics Board. Some praised her courage, others warned she was playing with fire. One email read, "Your Honor, given your familial connection to the defendant, immediate recusal is advised to preserve public confidence." Another, "Stay the course. History will remember courage, not compromise." Ava closed her laptop, pressing her palms to her eyes. She could still hear Clifford's words from yesterday. "They'll drag you down with me." Rosa entered softly, carrying a stack of motions. "Judge, the board wants an update. They're questioning whether you can remain." Ava exhaled. "Of course they are." "Do you want me to draft a recusal notice?" Rosa asked carefully. Ava shook her head. "Not yet. If I step down now, it tells every bully in this courthouse they can scare the bench with bloodlines. I won't hand them that victory." When the session opened, the gallery was packed tighter than before. Spectators craned for a view, phones tucked slyly in palms. Marcus sat in the front, folder open, notes neatly arranged. Clifford entered with a court-appointed attorney now, his wrists free but his pride shackled. He looked thinner overnight, his usual swagger replaced with barely contained fury. Judge Ava Hale called the room to order. "This court recognizes both parties. Proceedings will continue." The defense attorney, Mr. Lang, cleared his throat nervously. "Your Honor, in light of your relationship to Mr. Hale, we respectfully move for recusal." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Clifford smirked, watching his daughter closely. Ava's eyes narrowed. "Motion noted. Denied. The record will reflect that this court remains capable of impartial judgment. Justice does not pause for bloodlines." The phrase landed again, murmurs spreading. The reporters scribbled furiously. Marcus was called to expand on his evidence. He stood unfolding additional documents, receipts of seed purchases, testimonies from neighbors, photographs from the farmer's market showing his mother's stall. "This wasn't a hobby," Marcus explained, voice steady. "It was her business, her independence, and they destroyed it without notice, without cause." The judge reviewed the exhibits. Even Lang, fumbling for objections, looked cornered. Clifford finally erupted, slamming his hand on the table. "This is theater. You think some photos and grocery lists make a case? Ava, stop this madness before you ruin us both." The gallery gasped again. Ava's gavel cracked once, sharp. "Mr. Hale, another outburst and you'll be removed." Their eyes locked. Father and daughter, predator and judge. For a heartbeat, the courtroom felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a reckoning decades overdue. Outside during recess, Marcus sat on the courthouse steps, reporters buzzing like flies. Maya, his sister, joined him, handing him a bottle of water. "You're everywhere, Marcus. People online are calling you the man who stood up." He shook his head. "I'm not trying to be a symbol. I just want what's right." "Sometimes," Maya said softly, "symbols don't choose themselves. They're chosen." Back inside, Ava faced Rosa in chambers. "They'll come for me harder now. Ethics board, press, even my colleagues. But if I quit, Clifford wins. He gets to walk away as the victim of a witch hunt instead of the aggressor he is." Rosa hesitated. "Are you ready for the cost?" Ava straightened her shoulders. "The cost is mine to bear. Justice belongs to him, Mr. Reed, and to every voice like his that's been laughed out of this room." That afternoon, Ava issued a ruling to allow Marcus's case to proceed to full trial, denying the developer's motion to dismiss. The gallery erupted. Marcus closed his eyes, relief rushing through him. Clifford slammed his chair back, voice hoarse. "You'll regret this, Ava. You'll burn your robe for him." Ava looked down from the bench, her voice cutting and calm. "Better to burn for truth than to rot in lies." The gavel fell. The session ended. That night, news programs replayed the moment again and again. The daughter judge facing her disgraced father, choosing justice over blood. Commentators debated, was she reckless, or was she the very definition of integrity? But across the city, ordinary people weren't debating. They were whispering to each other, louder every day. Justice does not pause for bloodlines. The headlines the next morning carried two faces. Ava Hale in her black jacket, gavel midair, and Clifford Hale red-faced, shouting across the courtroom. One paper framed it as, "Daughter brings father to justice." Another twisted it differently. "Judicial bias? Judge rules against her own blood." Ava read them all before sunrise, sitting at her kitchen table with cold coffee. She knew it was coming. Praise from some, fire from others. But the speed with which the storm grew still rattled her. By mid-morning, her office phone was ringing off the hook. Some calls praised her integrity. Others accused her of betrayal. The Judicial Ethics Board left a voicemail requesting an urgent meeting. Ava pressed her palms into her eyes, steadying herself before walking into chambers. Rosa was already there, sorting papers. "Judge, it's chaos out there. Half the reporters want to crown you a hero. The other half say you're compromised." Ava dropped the papers on her desk. Both can be true in their eyes, but the law doesn't change. "Clifford is feeding it," Rosa said carefully. "He gave an interview last night. Called you a misguided idealist destroying her own family." Ava's jaw tightened. She wasn't surprised. Clifford had always been a master at flipping the script. Meanwhile, Marcus walked through his neighborhood with his sister Maya. Neighbors stopped him on the street, clapping him on the back, shaking his hand. "You showed guts, son. Standing up to people like Hale? About time. We're proud of you, Marcus." For the first time since the bulldozers tore through his mother's garden, Marcus felt something he hadn't in months: community behind him. Still, not everyone was supportive. At the corner store, a man muttered, "He's just looking for a payout. That judge only sided with him because she hates her daddy." Marcus stiffened, but Maya put a hand on his arm. "Let it go. You can't fight every whisper." Marcus exhaled slowly. "Maybe not, but I can fight in that courtroom." That afternoon, Clifford held his own press conference outside the courthouse. Cameras crowded as he stepped up to the microphones, his suit pressed but his eyes still bloodshot. "My daughter," he began, voice dripping with disdain, "has chosen to abandon both family and fairness. This isn't about justice, it's about vendetta. A personal crusade dressed up in a robe." Gasps rippled through the reporters. Clifford leaned in, delivering his lines like a closing argument. "Mark my words. History will not remember me as the villain here. It will remember her as the judge who destroyed her own father for a stranger's weeds." The phrase "stranger's weeds" lit up social media within minutes. Clifford had given the skeptics a new rallying cry. Inside chambers, Rosa showed Ava the clip on her tablet. Ava watched silently, her face unreadable until the end. When it was over, she set the tablet down. "He's trying to poison the narrative before the trial even starts." Rosa frowned. "Should we issue a statement?" "No," Ava said firmly. "If I answer outside the courtroom, I play his game. My rulings will speak louder than his microphones." But Clifford wasn't just using microphones. He met with allies at the development firm plotting strategy. "They want me disbarred?" Clifford scoffed. "Then I'll drag this case out until Marcus Reed can't afford the gas to drive here. And Ava? She'll crack under the board's pressure. She always wanted to prove she wasn't me. Let's see how long her fantasy lasts when the machine turns against her." The following day, the courtroom was fuller than ever. Activists filled the benches, holding quiet signs that read, "Justice for Reed" and "Property Rights Matter." On the other side sat Clifford's supporters, developers, lawyers, old allies from country clubs, staring daggers at Ava from the gallery. Marcus rose to present new evidence, testimony from a neighbor who had seen the bulldozers arrive at dawn before city inspectors were scheduled. The neighbor swore the crew admitted they were told to finish quick before anyone raised a fuss. Lang, Clifford's court-appointed attorney, squirmed. He tried to object on hearsay grounds, but Ava overruled him. "This testimony will be allowed," she declared. The gallery buzzed. Marcus sat down, his resolve deepening. During recess, Ava stepped into chambers. Alone for a moment, she let herself breathe. The robe felt heavier every day. Her father's words from the press conference echoed in her head. Destroyed her own father for a stranger's weeds. Was that how the public would see it? Was she risking everything she had built for one man's garden? But then she remembered Marcus's mother's letter, her plea written in looping script. "Promise me you'll make them answer." Ava straightened. "No," she whispered to herself. This isn't weeds, it's dignity, and that's worth the wait. When court resumed, Clifford could no longer hold back. He stood, ignoring Lang, and shouted toward Ava. You think you're righteous, Ava? You think the world will thank you for humiliating your own blood? They'll laugh at you when this is over. You're my daughter. And you'll always be my daughter. Robe or no robe. The room fell silent. Ava's face was calm, but her voice cut like glass. And you'll always be the man who thought power was permission. But in this court, permission belongs to the law, not you. Her gavel cracked, silencing the gallery. For Marcus, sitting with his folder, it was the clearest sign yet. This case was no longer just about his mother's garden. It was about breaking a cycle of arrogance that had ruled this courthouse for too long. And for Ava, it was personal, but not in the way Clifford wanted. It wasn't about destroying her father. It was about finally proving she wasn't him. By Monday morning, the courthouse was no longer just a place of law. It had become the city's main stage. Satellite vans crowded the curb, and protesters held signs on both sides of the steps. One group shouted, "Justice for Reed," while another countered with, "No nepotism on the bench." Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, heart pounding. He wasn't used to being in the center of a storm. He had come here for dignity, not headlines. Yet his mother's letter burned in his pocket, reminding him why he kept showing up. Inside, Judge Ava Hale sat in chambers with Rosa, reviewing motions. But her eyes weren't on the papers. She was staring at an official envelope on her desk, the seal of the state's Judicial Ethics Board. Rosa hesitated. "Are you going to open it?" Ava exhaled slowly and tore it open. The letter was blunt. Immediate appearance requested. Questions of impartiality due to familial relation with defendant. Recusal strongly recommended pending investigation. Her stomach clenched. Clifford had succeeded in moving the fight from the courtroom to the system itself. That afternoon, Clifford strutted into the courtroom without cuffs for the first time since the punch. He had posted bail and now looked polished again, a dark suit tailored sharp, his smirk restored. He whispered to Lang, his reluctant attorney, but spoke loud enough for the gallery to hear. "By the time the board is done, my daughter won't be fit to judge traffic tickets." The spectators chuckled nervously. Clifford thrived in the attention, every eye feeding his ego. Ava entered from chambers, robe flowing, expression composed. Only Rosa noticed the slight tension in her jaw, the kind that came from reading threats between the lines of official letters. "All rise," Rosa called. The courtroom stood. "Mr. Reed," Ava said, "you may proceed with further evidence." Marcus rose, presenting financial records from the Farmers Market Association that confirmed his mother's steady income from the garden. He read aloud statements from vendors who had worked beside her for years. "This wasn't weeds," Marcus said firmly. "This was livelihood, and they bulldozed it like it meant nothing." The gallery murmured. Even some of Clifford's supporters shifted uncomfortably. Clifford shot to his feet. "Your Honor, I object." Ava's gavel cracked. "You are not counsel, Mr. Hale. Sit down." But Clifford wasn't aiming for the record. He was aiming for the headlines. He turned to the gallery, voice booming. "See bias. She shuts down her own father because she wants to play savior for this man. How can anyone call this impartial?" Gasps rippled through the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. Clifford smirked, satisfied. He had planted the seed. After court adjourned for the day, Ava returned to chambers, her hands trembling as she removed her robe. Rosa closed the door softly. "You can't keep this pace, Judge. The board will force your hand." Ava stared out the window at the protesters below. "If I recuse, Clifford wins twice. He escapes accountability and paints me as weak. If I stay, I risk my robe." Rosa spoke gently. "And if you stay, you might also prove to the world that the law isn't a family heirloom. It belongs to everyone." Ava turned, eyes steady again. "Then I stay." Meanwhile, Marcus returned home to find a group of neighbors waiting. They held a banner with his mother's name painted across it. "Clara Reed's Garden Matters." An older woman clasped his hand. "Your mother helped feed this community. Don't let them call it weeds." Marcus swallowed hard, tears threatening. "I won't. I promise." For the first time, he realized the case wasn't just his burden. It was the neighborhood's too. That evening, Clifford appeared on a local news station. Polished and confident, he sat across from the anchor. "My daughter has decided to crucify me for ambition," he said smoothly. "She claims to stand for justice, but what she's really doing is using a minor property dispute to play hero. This isn't justice, it's betrayal. The anchor leaned in. But you did strike Mr. Reed in court. Clifford smiled thinly. Tempers flare, but since when does a father's mistake become the basis for a daughter's vendetta? Ask yourself, can a judge truly separate blood from the bench? The clip spread like wildfire. Hashtag surged. Had bias bench. Hashed Reed. Justice. Hashtag Hale vs. Hale. Back in her apartment, Ava watched the broadcast alone. Her father's words cut deep, not because they were true, but because he knew how to twist lies into doubts. She set the remote down, her reflection faint in the dark screen. Then her phone buzzed. It was a message from Marcus. Don't let him shake you. We both know what this is really about. She stared at the text, then at the locket she wore under her robe, a gift from her late mother, Clifford's wife, who had always told her, truth isn't family property, it's everyone's right. Ava whispered to the empty room, then truth it is. The next day, the courtroom was fuller than ever. Protest signs waved outside. The ethics board was watching. Reporters live tweeted every word. Judge Ava Hale took her seat, her gavel in hand, her voice calm but firm. This court will proceed. Marcus felt it in his bones. Whatever happened next would decide not just his case, but whether justice in this city was still bigger than the name Hale. The letter came sealed in thick ivory paper, the kind that carried more weight than the words inside. Judge Ava Hale broke it open at her desk, Rosa watching silently. You are hereby summoned to appear before the State Judicial Ethics Board to answer questions regarding your conduct and potential conflict of interest in the matter of Reed vs. Westfield Development. The date was set for 3 days later. Ava set the paper down. The silence stretched until Rosa finally spoke. They're coming for you. Ava nodded. They're coming for justice through me. She picked up the letter again, staring at the embossed seal. And Clifford's counting on me to fold. That afternoon, Clifford stood outside the courthouse with a circle of cameras surrounding him. He wore his victory smile again, polished by years of press conferences. My daughter, he said to the microphones, is blinded by her personal crusade. The ethics board knows it. The public knows it. Even she knows it. He held up a hand as if blessing the crowd. This isn't about gardens or property. This is about whether justice is bigger than family ties, or whether it's consumed by them. And sadly, Judge Hale has already answered. The crowd of his supporters clapped. Clifford thrived in their applause, convinced momentum was swinging back. Inside the courthouse, Marcus sat in the lobby, hearing Clifford's voice echo through the glass doors. Maya sat beside him, clutching his arm. He's spinning it again, she muttered, making it about him instead of what they did. Marcus exhaled slowly. That's his gift. But gifts don't last forever. Just then, a group of neighbors entered. Men and women Marcus had grown up with. They carried posters with photos of his mother's garden before the bulldozers came. We're here with you, Marcus, one woman said. If Clifford wants to make this a stage, then we'll show the whole city what was lost. Marcus's chest tightened with gratitude. For the first time, he realized he wasn't walking into that courtroom alone. When court resumed, the gallery was a sea of faces. Neighbors, activists, students, even strangers who had followed the story on the news. Some held quiet signs. Clara Reed's garden matters. Others simply sat, eyes fierce with solidarity. Marcus stood, presenting testimony from the Farmers Market Association. The president, an older man with a sun-worn face, spoke firmly. Clara Reed was a fixture. She fed this community. Losing that garden wasn't just her loss. It was ours. The gallery murmured in agreement. Even Ava, steady behind the bench, felt the swell of emotion ripple through the room. Clifford sneered. This is a circus. You're parading sob stories instead of facts. Ava's gavel cracked. Order. Testimony is admissible and relevant. Clifford's jaw clenched. His daughter's calm defiance cut deeper than any insult. After adjournment, Ava returned to chambers. Rosa closed the door behind them. You saw it, Judge, Rosa said. The people are with Marcus. They're with you too. Clifford may own microphones, but you have the gallery. Ava sat heavily, rubbing her temples. The gallery doesn't decide my robe. The board does. Rosa leaned closer. And what will you tell them when they ask why you didn't recuse? Ava looked up, her eyes steady. I'll tell them the truth. That blood doesn't erase law. That justice doesn't pause for family. 3 days later, Ava walked into the ethics board chamber. A long table stretched before her, lined with stern-faced officials. Cameras were banned, but reporters crowded outside the doors. "Judge Hale," the chair began, "do you understand why you've been called?" "Yes," Ava said, her voice firm, "because my father is the defendant in a case I now preside over." "And why have you refused recusal?" Ava's hands rested calmly on the table. "Because recusal would reward misconduct. My father assaulted a plaintiff in open court. To step aside would be to validate his belief that rules don't apply to him. Justice cannot bow to intimidation, not even from blood." The room was silent. One board member scribbled notes. Another leaned forward. "And you believe you can remain impartial?" Ava's eyes didn't waver. "I don't just believe it. I'm proving it, ruling by ruling." Outside the crowd was buzzing. Marcus stood with Maya, surrounded by neighbors. They held up posters of his mother's garden, chanting softly, "Truth doesn't pause, justice doesn't bow." When Ava exited the chamber hours later, she was met not by boos or doubts, but by applause. The community had chosen its side. For Clifford, watching from across the street, it was a nightmare. His daughter wasn't breaking. She was building something bigger. Something even his arrogance couldn't bulldoze. His hands curled into fists. "She thinks she's winning, but every empire falls." That night, Ava sat at her kitchen table, exhausted. Rosa had left and the apartment was quiet. She opened a worn notebook, one she hadn't touched in years. Inside was her mother's handwriting, a letter written before she passed. "Ava, never confuse loyalty with silence. If the law is to mean anything, it must apply to the people you love the same as the people you don't. That's the weight of justice." Ava closed the notebook, tears burning her eyes. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was fighting alone. She felt like her mother's voice, Marcus's courage, and the community's strength were all standing with her. And Clifford? Clifford was standing on an island, shrinking by the day. By the end of the week, the case had left the city and entered the country's bloodstream. National outlets picked up the story, not because of zoning maps or garden plots, but because of the image too powerful to ignore. A judge presiding over her disgraced father. Cable news anchors debated it nightly. Some praised Ava's courage. "She's proof justice is blind, even to blood." Others sneered. "This is a conflict of interest dressed up as morality theater." Clifford fed the fire eagerly. He appeared on morning shows in a perfectly pressed suit, his tone polished and sympathetic. "I love my daughter," he said gravely to one anchor, "but she's being used. Activists are whispering in her ear, convincing her that destroying her father is the only way to prove her independence. It breaks my heart to watch her make this mistake." The clip replayed endlessly. To the uninformed, Clifford looked like a victim of his daughter's ambition. To those who had seen him strike Marcus, the performance was a mask they recognized all too well. Marcus watched the coverage with Maya in their small living room. His hands tightened into fists. He's rewriting the story, making it about him again. Maya muted the television. "That's all he knows how to do, but people aren't stupid, Marcus. They saw you. They saw what he did." Marcus sighed. "Doesn't feel like it matters. He's louder." Maya's eyes softened. "Then you be steadier." At school assemblies across the city, students began carrying signs. "Justice doesn't pause for bloodlines." Teachers assigned debates about judicial integrity, zoning laws, and the meaning of impartiality. Naomi, the quiet student turned symbol, was being mentioned in the same breath as Judge Hale. For Marcus, the shift was dizzying. What had started as a fight over his mother's torn-up garden was now a national conversation about power, truth, and family. One evening, a neighbor stopped him at the grocery store. "Keep going, Marcus. You're speaking for more of us than you know." Marcus nodded, but the pressure weighed heavier with every word. Back in chambers, Ava met with Rosa. The ethics board hadn't ruled yet, but the pressure mounted daily. Letters poured in, piles on her desk. Some praised her, calling her brave. Others accused her of betrayal, even treason to her family. "Judge," Rosa said, sorting through them, "you can't read them all. You'll drown." Ava smiled faintly. "Already feel like I am." She picked up one letter, though, its handwriting shaky but clear. "Thank you for showing my daughter that justice isn't about names. She watched you on TV and said she wants to be a lawyer now." Ava folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her jacket pocket. "This is why I can't quit." Meanwhile, Clifford sat in a private office with his old allies, the developers who had hired him. Their faces were tight with worry. "You're toxic now, Cliff," one said. Every headline drags us down too. Clifford slammed his glass on the table. You think I'll go down alone? No. I built half this city's contracts. If I fall, I'll take every one of you with me. The room fell silent. They all knew he was capable of it. In court the next day, Marcus presented more testimony, this time from a city inspector who confirmed the bulldozers had indeed crossed the easement line without permits. This wasn't an accident, the inspector testified. It was deliberate. They knew they were over the boundary. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Ava banged her gavel. Order! Clifford jumped to his feet again, ignoring Lang's attempts to restrain him. This is a setup. My daughter is orchestrating this with activists. You're not just trying me, you're trying the Hale name. The gallery gasped. Ava's voice cut like ice. No one is trying the Hale name. This court is trying your actions. The words landed heavy. For the first time, Clifford looked less like a lawyer and more like a man cornered. During recess, reporters swarmed Marcus outside. Mr. Reed, what do you make of Clifford Hale's claim this is a setup? Do you think Judge Hale can remain impartial? Is this about a garden or about destroying a powerful family? Marcus held his ground. This is about dignity, my mother's and mine. This is about proving no one is above the law, not even people with powerful names. The clip went viral. For every critic, a dozen supporters reposted it, calling Marcus a symbol of resilience. That night, Ava watched the clip in her apartment. Her father's accusations, the board's silence, the public's noise, it all swirled together. But Marcus's calm words cut through. This is about proving no one is above the law. She whispered to herself, then we finish this. Clifford, however, wasn't finished. He sat in his study, eyes bloodshot, drafting a manifesto to release online. The hoax of Reed versus Westfield, how my daughter betrayed me. He poured venom into every line, convinced the louder he shouted, the more truth would bend. But outside his walls, the city was no longer bending. It was listening. And the echo was growing louder than his roar. 2 days later, Clifford Hale's manifesto appeared online. It wasn't published by a major outlet. No editor would touch it. Instead, Clifford uploaded it himself to a personal website, blasting the link to every reporter, blogger, and critic who would listen. The hoax of Reed versus Westfield, how my daughter betrayed justice and her own blood. The document stretched over 30 pages, dripping with bitterness. Clifford claimed Marcus was a pawn, manipulated by activists hungry for headlines. He painted himself as a father betrayed by an ambitious daughter desperate to prove herself. He twisted the facts, calling Clara Reed's garden a patch of weeds, dismissing the inspector's testimony as misinterpreted, and insisting the assault in court had been provoked. The piece spread quickly. Some read it in disbelief, others with outrage. A few, always eager for scandal, latched onto Clifford's narrative. By noon, hashtags trended. #ReedTruth, #BiasBench, and Clifford's own creation, #FamilyBetrayal. Marcus sat at his kitchen table with Maya, reading the document on his phone. His stomach churned. He's turning everything upside down, Marcus muttered, making me look like some puppet, making Ava look like a traitor. Maya slammed her palm on the table. Anyone who knows the truth can see through it. He's desperate. Marcus looked up. Desperation still makes noise, and noise spreads faster than truth. Maya's eyes softened. Then we'll be louder in a different way. Not by shouting, by standing. That evening, Ava sat in chambers long after the courthouse emptied. Rosa stood nearby, scrolling through reactions to Clifford's manifesto. "Judge, it's ugly out there," Rosa said. "Some people are buying into it. The board is probably reading it right now." Ava leaned back in her chair, exhaustion etched into her face. He knows exactly what he's doing. Not trying to win the case, trying to taint the process until the verdict doesn't matter. Rosa hesitated. "What are you going to do?" Ava's voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "I'm going to keep ruling by the book. The truth doesn't need me to shout. It needs me to stand." The next day, the courthouse steps were more crowded than ever. Protesters filled both sides, some waving Clifford's manifesto, others carrying posters of Clara Reed's garden. The chants clashed in the cold air, each side convinced of its truth. Inside, Marcus prepared to testify further. He clutched his mother's letter, the promise he had made to her echoing louder than the crowd outside. When he took the stand, his voice was quiet but unshaken. "My mother's garden wasn't weeds. It was life. It fed us, it fed our neighbors, and it gave her dignity. That was stolen from her. And all I want is for someone to admit it mattered." The gallery hushed. For a moment, even Clifford's supporters couldn't sneer. Ava nodded firmly. "Your testimony is entered into the record." Clifford shot to his feet, shouting over Lang's attempts to restrain him. "This is theater. My daughter is parading sentiment instead of law, and the world is too blind to see it." Ava's gavel cracked. "One more outburst and you will be removed from this courtroom." Their eyes locked. Father and daughter, truth and ego. The silence that followed was heavier than his shouting. After court, reporters surrounded Marcus. "Mr. Reed, how do you respond to Clifford Hale's manifesto? Do you feel like you're being used by activists, as he claims? Is this case really about property, or is it about power?" Marcus took a breath, steadying himself. "This is about a promise to my mother, about showing that no one, not even Clifford Hale, is above the law. I'm not a pawn. I'm a son honoring what was taken." The clip went viral within hours. Across social media, people reposted his words, calling them the heart of the case. That night, Ava scrolled through the clips in her apartment. She watched Marcus speak, saw the fire in his eyes, and felt a strange mixture of pride and sorrow. He hadn't asked for any of this, yet he carried it with more dignity than men twice his age. Her phone buzzed. A message from the ethics board. "Ruling on your status expected soon." Ava set the phone down, staring out at the city lights. Her father's manifesto might have poisoned the air, but Marcus's words reminded her of the antidote: steady truth. Meanwhile, Clifford sat in his study, scrolling through reactions to his manifesto. Some praised him, many mocked him, but all of them were talking about him, and that was enough. He poured himself a drink, muttering, "They can't erase me, not while my name is still in their mouths." But deep down, the cracks showed. He was louder than ever, but less believed than ever. And the louder he shouted, the steadier his daughter seemed to become. By week's end, the city no longer saw the case as weeds versus property. It saw it as a battle over the soul of justice itself. Was the law strong enough to withstand family ties? Was dignity worth more than power? And could truth really outlast noise? In the center of it all stood Marcus, Ava, and Clifford, each carrying their own weight, each refusing to bow. The storm was far from over, but the ground was shifting, and everyone in that courtroom felt it. By Monday morning, the city seemed split right down the middle. Clifford Hale's manifesto had whipped up his loyalists into a frenzy, but for every voice shouting bias, there were two more echoing Marcus's words about dignity. The courthouse steps were louder than ever, chants colliding, signs lifted high, reporters shouting over one another to capture sound bites. Inside chambers, Judge Ava Hale sat across from Rosa, staring at her phone. The email had arrived. Judicial Ethics Board ruling attached. Rosa held her breath as Ava clicked the file. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Ava exhaled slowly, reading aloud. After reviewing the conduct of Judge Ava Hale in the matter of Reed v. Westfield Development, the board finds no evidence of improper bias or misconduct. While the familial relationship between Judge Hale and the defendant is unusual, her actions to preserve order and uphold the law are consistent with judicial duty. The motion for mandatory recusal is denied. Rosa grinned. "You're cleared." Ava set the phone down, relief loosening her shoulders. "Cleared for now." She knew Clifford wouldn't stop, but the ruling was a line in the sand. The system itself had refused to bend to his noise. The gallery was already full when Ava entered the courtroom later that day. Rosa's announcement rang out, "All rise," and the room seemed to hold its breath. Ava lifted her gavel. "This court acknowledges the Judicial Ethics Board's ruling. Proceedings will continue under my authority." The murmurs rippled like a tide. On one side, activists and neighbors cheered softly. On the other, Clifford's supporters hissed and shook their heads. Clifford himself sat rigid at the defense table. His jaw clenched so tightly the muscles in his cheek twitched. Marcus rose to present his next piece of evidence. The inspector's written report, signed and dated, confirming the bulldozers had crossed the easement unlawfully. He handed copies to the clerk, his voice firm. "This proves my mother's land was violated, not by mistake, by choice." The gallery buzzed. Ava's eyes stayed steady. "The report is entered into evidence." Lang, Clifford's appointed attorney, tried to object. "Your Honor, the inspector's conclusions could be misinterpreted." "Overruled," Ava said. "The report stands." Clifford exploded, rising to his feet. "This is outrageous. My daughter hiding behind procedure, pretending she's impartial while tearing me down." Ava's gavel cracked. "Mr. Hale, you will sit down." Clifford turned to the gallery, voice booming. "Do you all see it? The betrayal in plain sight? My own blood condemning me." The room erupted, some shouting support, others booing. Ava's voice sliced through the chaos. "Order!" Her gavel fell again, echoing like thunder. The room stilled, but the tension only grew. During recess, reporters swarmed Marcus outside. "Mr. Reed, how do you feel about the board's decision to keep Judge Hale on the case? Do you trust her impartiality despite her father being the defendant? Are you prepared for the backlash this verdict might cause?" Marcus stood tall. "I trust Judge Hale because she's proven she doesn't bow to family or fear. This case isn't about me versus her father. It's about whether the law applies equally to everyone. And today, the answer is yes." The clip spread online within minutes. Supporters rallied behind his words. Hatch Equal Law began trending, overshadowing Clifford's #FamilyBetrayal. That evening, Ava sat in her apartment, exhaustion heavy in her bones. She opened her mother's old notebook again, flipping to the page she had nearly memorized. The law is not about who you love or who you fear. It is about what is right when both are tested. Her throat tightened. "I hope I'm making you proud," she whispered. Meanwhile, Clifford paced his study like a caged animal. His manifesto hadn't silenced Ava. The board hadn't removed her. And Marcus Reed was suddenly the darling of national headlines. He poured another drink, muttering to himself, "They think they've won. They think this is over. But I've been underestimated before." He scribbled furiously on legal pads, drafting a new plan. If he couldn't win in court, he'd wage war outside it. Political allies, old favors, pressure on the developers to bankroll an appeal. Anything to keep the spotlight from dimming on him. But even as he plotted, his empire crumbled. Contracts were slipping away. Old friends avoided his calls. And in the quiet between his rants, Clifford felt something unfamiliar, irrelevance creeping closer. The next morning, Marcus walked into court to find strangers stopping him in the hall. "You're fighting for all of us. Don't give up." "My daughter saw you on the news. She says she wants to study law now." Marcus nodded, humbled. The weight was heavy, but it no longer felt like his alone. Back in session, Ava addressed the court. "This case is not about names. It is not about family. It is about evidence, and the evidence will speak." Marcus sat straighter, his folder on the table. Clifford glared at his daughter, fury burning in his eyes. And the gallery leaned forward, sensing what everyone knew but few would say aloud. The trial was no longer just Reed versus Westfield development. It was Hale versus Hale. Truth against noise. Dignity against arrogance. Daughter against father. And the endgame was approaching. By midweek, the courthouse steps had become a theater. Every morning, protesters lined the stone staircase, their chants rising into the brisk air. On one side, Clifford's loyalists waved signs reading "Family First" and "Bias on the Bench." On the other, Marcus's supporters carried photos of Clara Reed's garden and banners that read, "Equal law, equal dignity." Marcus walked past them with his folder tucked under his arm, Maya at his side. He tried to block out the noise, but snippets of voices still pierced through. "She's tearing her father apart." "No, he brought this on himself." "Justice for Reed," Maya nudged him. "Keep your head up. They're chanting for you, not against you." Marcus nodded, jaw tight. The weight of expectation pressed harder every day, but so did the memory of his mother's words. "Promise me you'll make them answer." Inside, Clifford was already seated at the defense table. His suit was crisp, but the cracks were showing. His tie was slightly crooked, his hair less precise than usual. The once unshakable lawyer now looked like a man clinging to scraps of control. He leaned toward Lang, his reluctant court-appointed attorney. "I don't care what you say in there. Make Reed look like a fraud. If you can't, I will." Lang sighed. "Mr. Hale, antagonizing the judge, your own daughter, is not helping." Clifford's eyes narrowed. "She's not my daughter in that robe. She's my enemy." When Judge Ava Hale entered, the room snapped to silence. She took her seat, her gavel resting lightly in her hand. "This court is in session. Mr. Reed, continue your case." Marcus rose, presenting new evidence, invoices from local restaurants that had purchased Clara Reed's produce regularly. The papers bore signatures and dates, undeniable proof of the garden's economic role. "These receipts," Marcus said, his voice steady, "show that my mother's work wasn't just personal, it supported businesses. What was destroyed wasn't weeds, it was commerce." the gallery murmured. Rosa marked the documents as exhibits. Clifford suddenly stood, ignoring Lang. Objection. These are doctored. Anyone can forge a receipt. Ava's eyes cut to him. You are not counsel in this case, Mr. Hale. Sit down. But Clifford pressed on, voice booming toward the gallery rather than the bench. You see, she shuts me down every time, because the truth would expose her little show for what it is, an act of betrayal. Ava's gavel cracked. Bailiff, if Mr. Hale interrupts again, remove him from the courtroom. The threat hung heavy. For the first time, Clifford faltered, his bluster meeting a wall he couldn't punch through. During recess, reporters swarmed Clifford outside. Mr. Hale, are you worried about being removed from your daughter's courtroom? Do you deny the validity of the receipts presented today? Clifford smirked, slipping into his old performance mode. Receipts, testimonies, letters, it's all theater. This case isn't about evidence. It's about a daughter trying to prove she isn't her father, and she's willing to destroy her family to do it. The cameras loved it. His words spread fast, framed as father paints himself victim of judicial betrayal. Back inside, Marcus sat quietly, head bowed. Maya leaned closer. Don't let his noise get to you. People know the truth. Marcus whispered, he's louder. Maya squeezed his hand. Then we stay steadier. That evening, Ava returned to chambers. Rosa handed her a stack of mail, letters from citizens across the state. Ava sifted through them. Some scolded her. Family comes before law. Others praised her. You're proving justice still matters. One letter stopped her. Written in shaky handwriting, it read, My son was laughed out of court because we didn't have money for a lawyer. Watching you stand against your father gave me hope that maybe, one day, the law will see us too. Ava folded the letter gently. This isn't just about Marcus anymore, she murmured. It's about all of them. Meanwhile, Clifford's empire continued to crumble. Former clients cut ties. Developers whispered about finding new representation. Invitations to elite dinners stopped coming. One evening, he sat alone in his study, staring at dusty plaques on the wall. Best Trial Lawyer, 1998. Legal Excellence Award, 2003. They mocked him now, reminders of a legacy slipping away. He slammed a glass against the wall, shards scattering. She thinks she's ending me? No, I'll end her first. The next day, Clifford arrived at court with a folder of his own. He waited until Marcus finished testifying, then leapt to his feet waving papers. I have proof, he shouted, that this entire case is fabricated, that Marcus Reed is manipulating the court for money. The gallery gasped. Ava's gavel cracked. Mr. Hale, sit down. But Clifford shoved the papers onto the table, his voice shaking with rage. These documents show inconsistencies in his timeline. He's lying, and my daughter's, my own blood is helping him do it. Ava stood, slamming the gavel. Bailiff, remove Mr. Hale from this courtroom. Gasps erupted as Sergeant Klein moved swiftly, gripping Clifford's arm. For the first time, the once dominant lawyer was dragged out like any other disruptive defendant. His shouts echoed down the hallway. This is betrayal! Ava, you'll regret this! The gallery buzzed, whispers colliding like storm waves. Ava sat back down, breathing hard but composed. She lifted her gavel once more. Let the record show, she said firmly, that the defense attempted to introduce fabricated documents without verification. They are stricken from the record. This court will not be a stage for theatrics. Her words carried beyond the walls into every camera waiting outside. That night, the news cycle shifted. Instead of Clifford's bluster, the story was the image of him being dragged from his daughter's courtroom, papers fluttering uselessly in his wake. Commentators debated, but one phrase rose above the noise. Justice does not pause for bloodlines. For Marcus, it meant his mother's promise was closer to fulfillment. For Ava, it meant she had finally stepped out from her father's shadow. And for Clifford, it meant the empire he'd built on arrogance was crumbling faster than he could shout. The video of Clifford Hale being dragged from the courtroom hit the evening news before the sun had even set. It played on repeat, the once feared lawyer, red-faced, flailing against the bailiff's grip, shouting accusations as his daughter pounded the gavel. The clip spread online faster than any manifesto ever could. On social media, the tone shifted. Hashtags like #equal-law and #justice over blood trended higher than Clifford's #family betrayal. The public wasn't seeing betrayal anymore. They were seeing arrogance collapsing under its own weight. At a downtown cafe, strangers gathered around a TV mounted on the wall. A construction worker shook his head. You see that? Man thought he was untouchable. Not anymore. A college student replied, that judge, his own daughter, she didn't blink. That's what justice should look like. Across the city, the narrative was turning. Clifford's roar had finally begun to sound like desperation. Marcus walked home that night with Maya. Neighbors waved, some clapping him on the shoulder. One woman pressed a basket of vegetables into his hands. For your mama, she said softly. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He managed a nod, whispering, thank you. Maya leaned close. See, they're with you, with us. Marcus exhaled. I just want the court to see what they see. Inside her chambers, Ava sat with Rosa long after the courtroom emptied. Piles of letters covered her desk, too many to read. Rosa skimmed a few aloud. Thank you for standing for dignity. My father abused his power too. Watching you stand against yours gave me courage. Don't let him drag you down. We believe in you. Ava rubbed her temples. For every letter like that, there are others calling me a traitor. They still think I'm breaking some sacred rule by not protecting him. Rosa met her gaze. You're not breaking a rule. You're proving the law has no exceptions. That's scarier to people than betrayal. Ava looked down at her mother's notebook, still sitting on the desk. The words she'd read 100 times echoed again. The law is not about who you love or who you fear. It is about what is right when both are tested. She whispered, then let it be tested. Meanwhile, Clifford sat in his once grand study, the house dark around him. The phone rang less each day. Former allies were vanishing, distancing themselves before the fallout stained them too. One developer finally answered his call. Clifford launched into a rant about conspiracies, betrayal, Reed's so-called fraud. But the man interrupted. Cliff, you're toxic now. We can't be tied to you. Contracts are already slipping. We're cutting ties. Don't call again. The line went dead. Clifford stared at the phone, stunned. For the first time, he felt the sharp sting of abandonment. He whispered to himself, they'll come back. They always come back. But deep down, he knew the empire he'd built on intimidation was collapsing. The next day in court, the gallery was packed tighter than ever. Many held photos of Clara Reed's garden, some with candles taped to poster boards, turning the space into something that felt almost like a vigil. Marcus sat with his folder, looking around at the faces. For the first time, he didn't feel alone at the plaintiff's table. The community had claimed his fight as their own. When Ava entered, the room rose. She took her seat, her face calm but resolute. This court recognizes the continuation of Reed v. Westfield development, she said. Marcus presented more witness statements. Neighbors who confirmed Clara had supplied produce, children who remembered her teaching them how to plant tomatoes in the soil. The testimony painted a vivid picture. This was more than property. It was heritage. Lang, Clifford's weary attorney, barely objected anymore. With Clifford barred from speaking, Lang was left to shuffle papers while the case crumbled. The gallery grew restless, not with outrage, but with quiet anticipation. They could sense the tide turning. Outside, reporters filled the airwaves with analysis. One anchor declared, Clifford Hale has become the symbol of a dying era, where power meant protection. But his daughter, Judge Ava Hale, has turned that era on its head. Another countered, yes, but the question remains, will the public see this as bravery or as betrayal? The jury is still out, literally and figuratively. But the clips of Marcus's calm testimony, Ava's unwavering rulings, and Clifford's angry removal painted a clear picture. To most, the betrayal narrative had lost its bite. That evening, Ava left the courthouse to find a small crowd waiting. Not protesters this time, but supporters. They didn't shout. They simply held candles and signs that read, Stand Strong. One young girl stepped forward shyly, handing Ava a folded note. I want to be a judge one day, the girl whispered. Ava smiled faintly, her throat tight. Then promise me you'll remember this. Justice isn't about protecting power. It's about protecting truth. The girl nodded, clutching the words as if they were a gift. At home, Clifford poured himself another drink, staring at the television replay of his own humiliation. The image of his daughter on the bench burned in his mind, stronger than the whiskey in his glass. They think this is over, he muttered. They don't know me, but for the first time the words sounded hollow, even to him. And in the city beyond his darkened study, people whispered a different truth, passing it along like a torch. Justice does not pause for bloodlines. The morning sun cut through the courthouse windows, but Clifford Hale entered like a man walking into shadow. His once commanding stride had slowed, his eyes ringed with sleepless nights. The cameras still followed him, but their tone had changed. Instead of reverence, the flashes carried curiosity, even mockery. Marcus arrived minutes later, shoulders squared, folder in hand. Beside him, Maya whispered, "Look around. People aren't here for him anymore. They're here for you." Marcus glanced at the gallery filling with neighbors, activists, students, even strangers. The posters they carried didn't mention Hale. They bore Clara Reed's name. Clara's Garden Matters. Equal law for all. The story had shifted, and Clifford was no longer its center. Inside chambers, Ava reviewed the docket. Rosa handed her a fresh stack of motions, but the judge's eyes lingered on the crowd outside her window. "They're not just protesting anymore," Ava murmured. "They're remembering Clara Reed." Rosa smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what scares your father the most, that the case isn't about him anymore." Ava nodded. For once, the story doesn't orbit his name, and he doesn't know how to survive outside his own shadow. When court opened, the air was thick with anticipation. Ava's gavel brought silence. "This court will proceed with further testimony in Reed versus Westfield Development." Marcus rose, calling another witness, a restaurant owner who had purchased produce from Clara for years. The man's voice was steady. "She brought in baskets every week. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs. Customers loved it. When her garden was bulldozed, we lost more than supply. We lost a neighbor who cared about feeding people." The gallery murmured, nodding. The testimony was simple, human, and devastating for Clifford's defense. Lang attempted a half-hearted cross-examination, but his questions stumbled. The truth was too clear to shake. Clifford, however, couldn't stay silent. He slammed his palm on the table, standing abruptly. "This is a circus," he barked. "A sentimental parade meant to manipulate emotions, not law." Ava's gavel cracked. "Mr. Hale, you are not permitted to address this court directly." He sneered at her, voice dripping with venom. "You've turned this bench into a stage for your own ego, Ava. Betraying your own father for applause. Does that feel noble?" The gallery gasped. Reporters scribbled furiously. Ava met his eyes with calm steel. "This bench is not about ego, it's about evidence, and evidence is what you lack." Clifford's face flushed crimson. For the first time, he had no retort. During recess, Clifford tried to find solace among his old allies. But the courthouse lobby told a harsher story. Former clients avoided his gaze, turning away as he approached. One shook his head sharply. "We can't be seen with you, Cliff. It's bad for business." Clifford froze, the words slicing deeper than any courtroom defeat. Bad for business. Once he was business. Now he was a liability. He retreated to a corner, pulling out his phone. The contact list that once felt like a map of power now looked like a graveyard. Names he had built his career on no longer answered. Messages went unread. For the first time in decades, Clifford felt what Marcus had lived with all along, being invisible. Meanwhile, Marcus stepped outside to find supporters waiting. They greeted him with cheers, shaking his hand, thanking him. One teenager pushed through the crowd shyly, holding a notebook. "Mr. Reed," she said softly, "I want to study law one day, because of you." Marcus swallowed hard. "Don't study law because of me. Study it because truth needs voices like yours." The girl nodded, clutching his words like a gift. Maya leaned close, smiling. "See, you're more than a plaintiff now, you're hope." Marcus exhaled slowly. The weight felt heavier than ever, but no longer unbearable. That evening, Ava sat at her kitchen table, watching the coverage. Every channel showed Clifford's outburst, his venom toward her, his loss of control. Commentators debated whether his collapse was inevitable, whether Ava's rulings were reshaping what justice looked like in their city. One anchor summed it up simply: "We're witnessing the fall of a name and the rise of an idea, that justice does not pause for bloodlines." Ava closed her laptop, staring out at the city lights. Her father's voice still echoed in her ears, but so did her mother's. "Never confuse loyalty with silence." She whispered, "I'm not silent anymore." Across town, Clifford sat in his dark study, the glow of the TV painting harsh lines across his face. Empty bottles littered the desk. He replayed his outburst, watching himself lose control. "They think I'm finished," he muttered. "They think she's stronger than me." He gripped his glass so tightly it cracked, whiskey spilling across old legal pads. His empire was crumbling. His daughter was standing taller. And in the silence that followed, Clifford felt the one thing he had spent his life outrunning: Irrelevance. The next morning, the courthouse was quieter, but only in volume. The protests had turned into vigils. People lit candles, holding them beneath signs of Clara's garden. The noise had shifted into something more powerful, steady, unwavering presence. Marcus walked up the steps, seeing the flames flicker in the dawn. He touched his mother's letter in his pocket and whispered, "We're almost there, Mom." Inside, Ava adjusted her robe, preparing for another day. The storm wasn't over, but the tide had turned. And Clifford, watching from the shadows of his fading power, realized that the louder he shouted, the more invisible he became. By now, Reed v. Westfield had outgrown its docket number. What began as a fight over a bulldozed garden had transformed into something larger. Headlines called it the trial of power and blood. The courthouse steps had turned into a nightly gathering. Not protests this time, but vigils. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, gathered with candles, holding posters of Clara Reed's smiling face beside her garden. The flames flickered against the stone walls, a steady reminder of what was truly at stake. Marcus stood at the edge of one vigil, watching in silence. People he'd never met whispered his mother's name as though they'd known her. A young man stepped forward with a guitar, strumming softly while voices hummed. Maya nudged her brother. "You see this? You started it." Marcus shook his head. "No, Mom did. I'm just keeping the promise." Inside her chambers, Ava watched from the window as the candles glowed. Rosa joined her, setting down a stack of new motions. "Judge, you're not just presiding anymore," Rosa said quietly. "You've become part of it." Ava's brow furrowed. "Judges aren't supposed to be part of movements." Rosa smiled faintly. "Sometimes justice is." Ava looked down at the flame-lit crowd again. The weight pressed heavier on her shoulders. Every ruling now carried more than law. It carried hope, and hope could be as heavy as guilt. Meanwhile, Clifford sat in his dim study, curtains drawn. The phone hadn't rung in days. Old clients had cut ties. The developers whispered his name like a curse. He stared at the television, watching coverage of the vigil. His jaw clenched as reporters praised Marcus Reed's courage and Judge Ava Hale's integrity. "They've turned her into a saint," Clifford muttered, slamming his fist against the arm of his chair. "And me into the villain." He poured another drink, his hands shaking. "I built this city's deals. I bent its courts, and now I'm erased by candles and songs." The loneliness pressed like a vice. Clifford had spent his life commanding rooms, bending juries, intimidating rivals. Now even his voice seemed to echo back at him, hollow. The next day in court, the gallery was fuller than ever. Students in matching shirts sat together, teachers beside them. Elderly neighbors clutched each other's hands. The air was reverent, not rowdy. Marcus presented another piece of evidence. Market Association records showing Clara Reed's contributions to community programs, vegetable donations to schools, baskets given to shelters. "She didn't just grow food," Marcus said softly. "She gave it away." That's what was lost. The gallery nodded, some wiping away tears. Ava entered the exhibits into the record. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried the weight of every gaze fixed on her. Lang, looking weary, attempted to counter. "Your Honor, while the plaintiff's mother was charitable, this case is about land use, not legacy." Ava replied firmly, "Legacy and land are intertwined when destruction strips both. The evidence remains." Clifford, seated silently under bailiff watch, seethed. His face twitched with every ruling, but his voice was gone. Ava had silenced it with authority he couldn't outshout. During recess, Marcus stepped outside to find reporters waiting. "Mr. Reed, do you feel this case is now bigger than your family's loss?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but it's not about me. It's about every voice that thought the law was out of reach. If this case proves anything, it's that the law belongs to all of us." The clip replayed across networks. Commentators called him the reluctant symbol, a man carrying justice not by choice, but by promise. That evening, Ava scrolled through the coverage alone in her apartment. She saw Marcus's face on the screen, his quiet words replayed again and again. She saw crowds holding candles outside the courthouse, chanting not slogans but truths. She whispered to herself, "This isn't weeds anymore. This is dignity." Her phone buzzed with another message from the ethics board. Not a warning this time, but a note of acknowledgement. Public confidence increasing. Maintain impartiality. She almost laughed. Impartiality had never felt so heavy. Meanwhile, Clifford's spiral deepened. He tried calling old allies again, but each conversation ended the same. "Cliff, you're toxic." We can't touch you anymore. You should have kept your mouth shut. One evening, he dialed a number he hadn't called in years, his daughter's. When the line went to voicemail, he didn't leave a message. He set the phone down, staring at it, whispering to the empty room, "Ava, you were supposed to be me." The next morning, the courtroom felt electric. Reporters whispered that the trial was entering its final stages. Supporters filled every seat. Ava took her place on the bench, gavel in hand. She looked out at Marcus, steady in his promise, and at Clifford, shrinking in his silence. "This court," she said firmly, "will hear closing arguments soon. Let the record reflect that this case is not about names. It is about evidence, and evidence will guide this verdict." The gallery sat in reverent silence. Everyone knew. The end game was near. The courthouse was no longer just a civic building. It had become a stage where the city's soul was being argued. Each morning, the steps filled with cameras, supporters, critics, and the curious. Some came with candles, some with signs, but all came with eyes locked on one story. Reed vs. Westfield, which now carried a weight far heavier than a property dispute. Inside chambers, Judge Ava Hale sat alone, robe draped over her chair, staring at her reflection in the dark glass of the window. She whispered the words she'd spoken so many times before. Justice does not pause for bloodlines. But tonight, the phrase felt heavier, because she knew her father wasn't finished, not yet. Marcus, meanwhile, felt the storm in a different way. On the morning of another hearing, a stranger stopped him on the street, clutching his hand. "My son was arrested years ago, railroaded by a system that never listened. Watching you stand your ground, it's like watching him finally be heard." Marcus nodded silently, throat tight. He never asked to be a symbol, but the faces around him, neighbors, strangers, students, kept reminding him that this case was no longer just his. It was theirs. Maya noticed his unease. "You don't have to carry all of them, Marcus. Just keep carrying Mom's promise. That's enough." Across town, Clifford sat in his study, the air thick with stale smoke and arrogance clinging to its last threads. The TV replayed clips of Ava silencing him. Marcus speaking with quiet strength, crowds chanting outside the courthouse. "They've turned me into a villain," he muttered, swirling whiskey in his glass. But villains still write endings if they know where to strike. On the desk before him lay a folder, not legal documents this time, but a dossier of personal attacks, Marcus's financial struggles, old debts, neighborhood rumors twisted into weapons. Clifford picked up the phone, dialing a reporter who still owed him favors. "I've got a story for you," he said, his voice smooth again. "The truth about Marcus Reed." The next morning, a headline splashed across tabloids. "Hero or hustler? Questions raised about Reed's past." The article dredged up Marcus's late payments on bills, a dismissed traffic violation, and twisted it all into a portrait of an unreliable man. Outside the courthouse, Clifford arrived with the smugness of a man who thought he'd reclaimed control. Cameras crowded him as he declared, "The plaintiff isn't the saint you've all made him out to be. This case is built on lies, and now the truth comes out." Inside, Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table, the article spread before him. His face burned, not from guilt, but from shame at having his struggles paraded as scandal. Maya leaned close. "Don't let him get to you. Everyone has bills, mistakes. That doesn't erase Mom's garden." Marcus clenched his fists. "But he's trying to erase me." When court opened, the gallery buzzed with tension. Clifford smirked as whispers spread. But Ava entered, her gavel silencing the noise. "This court will proceed," she said firmly. Lang, weary as ever, tried to introduce the article as evidence of Marcus's credibility. Ava shut it down instantly. "Denied. Character assassinations outside this courtroom hold no weight here. This case is about property, evidence, and law, not tabloids." Her words cut through the room. Marcus lifted his head, relief washing over him. Clifford's smirk faltered. During recess, reporters swarmed Marcus asking if he wanted to address the article. Marcus steadied his breath and spoke clearly. "Yes, I've had struggles. My family wasn't wealthy. We worked hard, we made mistakes, we kept going. That doesn't change what happened to my mother's garden. That doesn't change what was destroyed. If anything, it proves why this fight matters. Because the law shouldn't only work for the perfect, it should work for all of us." The clip replayed nationwide within hours. Commentators called it the moment Marcus Reed silenced the smear. Online, new hashtags surged. Hat at law for all, #stand with Reed. Clifford's gambit had backfired spectacularly. That evening, Ava sat in chambers, exhaustion tugging at her bones. Rosa entered with her tablet, smiling. You should see this. Marcus's words are everywhere. People aren't buying Clifford's attack. They're rallying harder. Ava allowed herself a faint smile. Because truth stands, even when it stumbles. Rosa added softly, and because you've shown them it's safe to believe in truth again. Ava looked down at her gavel, fingers tracing its handle. She thought of her mother's letter, Marcus's vow, and Clifford's desperate roar. The end was coming. She could feel it. That night, Clifford sat alone in his darkened house, staring at the television. Every channel showed Marcus's defiant words, Ava's rulings, the candlelit vigils outside the courthouse. He hurled his glass across the room, shattering it against the wall. They think they've won, but I'll never let them write my ending. But the cracks were too wide. His empire was gone, his allies silent, his daughter unshaken. And the louder he shouted, the smaller he seemed. Back at the courthouse, the vigil grew. Hundreds gathered now, their candles lighting the night. The chants weren't loud, they were steady, unbroken. Justice does not pause for bloodlines. Inside his pocket, Marcus held his mother's letter, whispering again, "Almost there, Mom." And in chambers, Ava whispered the same, staring out at the glow of candles below. The storm had not ended, but the tide had turned. By the following week, the courthouse was no longer just a building of stone and glass. It had become a beacon. News networks broadcast live from the steps, where crowds swelled larger than ever. What had begun as local protest was now a national movement. Signs carried phrases far beyond Clara Reed's garden: law for all, truth over blood, justice without fear. Marcus stood among the candles one night, listening as strangers chanted his mother's name. He felt his throat tighten. Maya nudged him gently. "You hear that? They're saying Clara's name like she's everyone's mother now." Marcus whispered, "She'd never believe it if she were here." Maya smiled softly. "She'd tell you to stay steady, just like she always did." Inside chambers the next morning, Ava watched the growing crowds from her window. Rosa entered with the day's docket, but Ava's eyes lingered on the scene below. "They're not just standing for Marcus anymore," Ava said. "They're standing for the idea that the law can belong to them." Rosa nodded. "And you've given them reason to believe that." Ava shook her head slightly. "Judges aren't supposed to be symbols, but somehow we've all become one." She pressed her hands against the desk. The robe had never felt heavier, not because of the fabric, but because of the weight of hope stitched into every seam. Meanwhile, Clifford's decline was accelerating. Alone in his study, he scrolled through articles on his laptop. Every headline was another nail. Former powerhouse Hale humiliated in court. Community rallies behind Reed. Judge Hale emerges as symbol of integrity. He slammed the lid shut, rage boiling. His phone was silent. No clients, no allies, no invitations. For decades, Clifford had thrived on power. Rooms he controlled, contracts he bent, juries he intimidated. Now he was a man shouting at walls, his empire reduced to dust. He poured another drink, muttering, "They think I'm finished, but I still know where to strike." But the words lacked conviction, echoing hollow in the empty house. That afternoon, court reconvened. The gallery was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Ava entered, her gavel bringing silence. "Proceed with testimony," she ordered. Marcus called another witness, a schoolteacher who testified that Clara Reed had donated fresh produce weekly to help feed students. The testimony was simple, human, and unshakable. She believed every child deserved healthy food, the teacher said. Her garden was her way of giving. The gallery nodded, some wiping away tears. Ava entered the testimony into record. Clifford shifted uneasily in his seat, silent under the bailiff's watch. Outside during recess, reporters swarmed Marcus again. "Mr. Reed, did you expect this level of national support? Do you see yourself as a civil rights leader now?" Marcus shook his head firmly. "I'm not a leader, I'm a son. My mother asked me to make them answer, and that's all I'm doing. If people see hope in that, then maybe it means hope is still possible." The clip replayed across networks, sparking commentary. Analysts debated whether Marcus was the reluctant hero America needed. Supporters online shared his words with captions like, "Hope is possible." That night, Ava returned home to find another letter in her mailbox. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "My family never trusted the courts. We thought they were for the rich and powerful only. Watching you stand against your own father gave us faith that maybe justice can see us too. Don't stop." Ava folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her mother's notebook. She whispered to herself, "This is bigger than me now." Meanwhile, Clifford made one last desperate attempt to rally old friends. He arranged a meeting at a downtown restaurant inviting former clients and colleagues. Only 3 showed up, their faces tense. Clifford launched into his rant. "She's humiliating me to build her own name. And Reed, he's a fraud, a pawn. If we band together, we can crush this before it ruins us all." The men exchanged uneasy glances. One finally spoke. "Cliff, it's over. The public isn't with you. The board isn't with you. Even your allies can't afford you anymore." Clifford's face flushed. "You'd abandon me now?" The man's voice was cold. "You abandoned yourself." They left, leaving Clifford alone at the table. He sat back, eyes burning with rage and loneliness. Back in court, Ava prepared for closing arguments. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimony clear, the public watching with unblinking eyes. But still, she felt the tension coil inside her. This case, she thought, will decide more than damages. It will decide whether justice can stand taller than power. She looked at Marcus, steady and quiet, clutching his mother's letter like a shield. Then at Clifford, slumped and silent, a relic of a fading era. The contrast was stark, and Ava knew the verdict would echo far beyond these walls. That evening, the vigil outside swelled larger than ever. Thousands gathered now, candles lighting the night sky. The chants were no longer loud. They were steady, like a heartbeat. Justice does not pause for bloodlines. Inside, Marcus whispered to his mother's memory, "We're almost there." And in her chambers, Ava whispered the same. By the time the courthouse reopened for what everyone believed would be the final week of testimony, the crowds outside had swelled into thousands. News outlets described it as a gathering that feels less like protest and more like pilgrimage. Candles lined the steps like stars fallen from the sky, each flame carrying Clara Reed's name. Marcus climbed the steps slowly, his mother's letter tucked in his pocket as always. Maya walked beside him, her voice quiet. "When this is over, you'll finally be able to breathe." Marcus gave a tired smile. "I don't think this ends with me." "Not anymore." Maya nodded. "That's the point. It's bigger than us." Inside, Ava Hale entered chambers earlier than usual, robe folded neatly on the chair. She sat with Rosa, reviewing the docket for the day. Her face was calm, but the lines around her eyes carried the weight of months of pressure. "They'll expect closing arguments soon," Rosa said softly. Ava exhaled. "And my father knows it. That's why he'll strike one last time." Rosa tilted her head. "Do you really think he has anything left?" Ava looked down at her mother's notebook, resting on the desk. "Desperation is a kind of fuel. He'll burn it until there's nothing left." Clifford proved her right before court even began. He arrived flanked by 2 reporters, clutching yet another folder. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, but his voice carried with the same old arrogance. "This case," he declared to the cameras, "isn't about gardens or dignity. It's about my daughter seeking headlines. She wants to make herself a martyr at her father's expense. But today, I'll show the world the truth." He waved the folder dramatically. Proof of Marcus Reed's deception. The reporters scribbled eagerly, but their eyes betrayed doubt. Clifford had cried wolf too many times. When court opened, Ava's gavel brought silence. Clifford shifted in his seat, itching to unleash his folder. "Proceed with evidence," Ava said to Marcus. Marcus rose calmly, presenting final records. City maps, invoices, testimonies already corroborated. His case was airtight now, layered piece by piece until no gaps remained. When he finished, the gallery erupted in applause before Ava's gavel restored order. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. The plaintiff rests." Clifford seized his chance, standing abruptly. "Your Honor, I demand the right to present new evidence proving this case is a sham." He slammed the folder onto the defense table, papers spilling out. Unverified statements, blurry photographs, half-baked accusations. "This," Clifford shouted, "shows Reed falsified records and manipulated witnesses." The gallery gasped. Reporters scribbled furiously, but Ava remained unmoved. "Mr. Hale," she said firmly, "these documents are unverified and inadmissible." Clifford sneered. "Of course you'd say that. You're not a judge. You're a daughter playing God with your father's life." The courtroom buzzed with shock. Ava's gavel cracked like thunder. "Bailiff, remove the defendant's folder from the record. Let it be stricken." Sergeant Klein gathered the papers, handing them to Rosa. Clifford lunged forward, shouting, "You can't silence me! This is betrayal! Blood means nothing to you!" The gallery erupted into chaos. Supporters shouted him down. Others called for order. Ava stood tall above it all. "This court," she said, voice cutting through the storm, "will not be held hostage by theatrics. We proceed on evidence, not on noise." Her gavel fell again, silencing the room. During recess, Marcus sat quietly on a bench outside the courtroom. He held his mother's letter tightly, his knuckles white. Maya sat beside him. "You did it," she whispered. His last card was empty. Marcus shook his head. He'll never stop shouting, but maybe people finally stopped listening. Meanwhile, Clifford retreated to his car, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the glass. His phone buzzed with missed calls, but not from allies. From creditors, former clients, people demanding repayment. He hurled the phone onto the passenger seat, gripping the wheel until his knuckles went pale. "They think I'm done. They think she's won." His voice cracked, the old power gone. But Hale is still a name, my name. Yet for the first time, even he didn't believe it. That night, the vigil outside the courthouse grew larger than ever. Entire families arrived holding candles, telling stories about Clara Reed even if they'd never met her. Her name had become more than one woman's. It was a stand-in for dignity itself. Marcus stood among them, humbled. A stranger placed a candle in his hand. "For your mother," she said. He whispered, "For everyone like her." Inside her apartment, Ava sat at her kitchen table, robe draped over the chair. She opened her mother's notebook once more, her eyes tracing the faded handwriting. Justice is not about who you love or who you fear. It is about what is right when both are tested. She closed the book, whispering, "I hear you, Mom. And tomorrow, I finish this." The next morning, the courthouse felt different. Not louder, but heavier, as if the walls themselves knew the end was near. Ava took the bench, her gavel in hand. Marcus sat steady, folder closed, his mother's letter in his pocket. Clifford slumped at the defense table, his folder gone, his empire shattered. And the gallery leaned forward, sensing history in the making. The trial was ready for closing arguments. The courtroom was at capacity, every seat filled, every aisle crowded, every eye trained on the bench. The silence before closing arguments felt like a held breath, heavy with expectation. Outside, the candlelight vigils had spilled into the streets, thousands standing shoulder to shoulder, their chants muted into a steady hum of presence. Judge Ava Hale raised her gavel. "We will now hear closing arguments. The plaintiff may proceed." Marcus rose slowly, smoothing the front of his jacket. He clutched his mother's letter inside his pocket, drawing strength from the words she had written. Then he stepped forward, facing not only the judge but the entire room. "My mother's garden wasn't weeds," he began, voice quiet but firm. "It was her work, her pride, her way of feeding this community. You've heard the evidence, receipts, testimonies, city records, but beyond papers and signatures, this is about dignity." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. Clara Reed believed dignity wasn't something you could buy or bulldoze. It came from the work of your hands, from what you gave others. When her garden was destroyed, it wasn't just vegetables that were lost. It was her independence, her voice. And when she asked me to promise I'd make them answer, she wasn't asking for revenge. She was asking for recognition, that her life mattered. Marcus's voice grew stronger. "This case is not about power. It's about whether the law sees everyone the same. Whether a woman's garden matters as much as a developer's contract. Whether the name Reed stands equal to the name Hale." He looked directly at Ava now, but his words were for the gallery, for the cameras, for the world beyond. If the law only serves the powerful, then it isn't law, it's theater. But if the law serves truth, then dignity wins. That's all I'm asking for. Dignity for my mother and dignity for all of us. The gallery erupted into quiet applause, quickly silenced by Ava's gavel, but the echoes lingered, a heartbeat of support. "Defense may proceed," Ava said, her tone steady. Lang rose reluctantly, shuffling his papers. "Your Honor, while we sympathize with Mr. Reed's loss, this case is about property law. Sentiment cannot replace contracts. The developers acted within their rights, and to conflate charity with commerce undermines the legal foundation of this city. We urge the court to dismiss the emotional appeals and rule strictly by law." His words landed flat. Even Lang seemed unconvinced, his voice devoid of fire. He sat quickly, avoiding Clifford's glare, but Clifford could not stay silent. He shot to his feet, voice booming across the room. "This is all a lie. A garden? Dignity? My daughter is using this court to humiliate me. She's no judge. She's a traitor." The gallery gasped. The bailiff stepped forward, but Clifford raised his arms like a performer. "Look at her, passing judgment on her own father. Do you really think this is justice? No, this is betrayal in robes." For the first time, no one in the gallery shouted back. The silence was deafening. Clifford's words hung in the air, but they carried no weight anymore. Ava's gavel cracked once, her voice cut like steel. "Mr. Hale, sit down. This is your final warning." Clifford froze, scanning the faces around him. But where he expected applause or nods, he saw only indifference or pity. His voice faltered. He sank back into his chair, smaller than he had ever appeared. Ava turned her gaze across the room. "This court has heard both sides. The arguments are now closed." The gallery exhaled in unison, as though a storm had finally passed. Marcus returned to his seat, shoulders heavy but eyes clear. Clifford stared at the table, his hands trembling. During recess, reporters swarmed the steps. "Mr. Reed, how do you feel about your closing argument? Do you think the judge can rule fairly despite her father being the defendant? Do you believe this case has already changed the law?" Marcus answered calmly. "This case was never about me winning. It was about whether truth could be heard. Today, it was." The clip replayed across national broadcasts within the hour. Commentators called it the speech that turned a case into a cause. That night, the vigil outside grew larger than ever. Entire blocks were filled with candles, their flames glowing against the night. Families brought children, teachers brought students, strangers stood arm in arm. They weren't chanting Clifford's name or Marcus's. They were chanting one truth, steady and unshakable. Justice does not pause for bloodlines. Inside her apartment, Ava watched the coverage in silence. Her robe hung on the chair beside her. She picked up her mother's notebook, reading the words again. "The law is not about who you love or who you fear. It is about what is right when both are tested." Her hands trembled, but her eyes were steady. Tomorrow, she would deliver her verdict, and it would echo far beyond the courthouse walls. Across town, Clifford sat in the dark, television flickering. He watched the coverage, the chants, the candles. His glass trembled in his hand. For the first time in decades, he realized no one was listening. "They've already written me out," he muttered. His voice cracked. "Even my daughter." The words echoed back at him, hollow in the silence, and in the city beyond, people whispered to one another, carrying the phrase like a torch. Justice does not pause for bloodlines. The trial was over in evidence, but the verdict would decide its soul. The courthouse lights dimmed, but the city outside refused to sleep. The vigil stretched for blocks now, candles flickering in the autumn wind, their glow reflected in the courthouse's stone walls. The chants had softened into whispers, almost like prayers. "Justice does not pause for bloodlines." Marcus walked slowly through the crowd, the letter from his mother clutched in his jacket. Strangers nodded as he passed. Some reached out to touch his arm. A little boy tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Reed, my mom says you're fighting for all of us." Marcus crouched down, his throat tight. "I'm just keeping a promise," he said softly. "And you'll grow up in a world where promises mean something." The boy's eyes shone as he slipped back into the crowd. Maya stepped beside her brother, her voice low. "You know, Mom would have been proud already. No verdict can change that." Marcus looked up at the courthouse steps, lit like an altar. "Still, it's tomorrow that will matter. For her, for all of them." Across town, Clifford sat in his study, curtains drawn, empty glasses scattered across the desk. His once prized plaques stared back at him, dusty and forgotten. The television replayed clips of Marcus's closing argument, of Ava silencing him, of the chants outside the courthouse. He hurled the remote across the room, glass shattering. "They think it's over! They think I've lost!" But his voice cracked, carrying no weight. The silence that followed was heavier than any gavel. Clifford buried his head in his hands. For decades, he had been the storm. Now he was the echo. He poured another drink, muttering to himself, "She was supposed to be me. She was supposed to carry my name, not burn it." But deep down, he knew Ava had chosen something far stronger than his name. Meanwhile, Ava sat alone in her apartment, robe draped neatly over the chair. Her mother's notebook lay open before her, its faded ink as sharp as ever. Justice is not about who you love or who you fear. It is about what is right when both are tested. She whispered the words aloud, steadying herself. Tomorrow I'm tested. Her phone buzzed with messages, supporters, colleagues, even strangers thanking her for standing firm. She read one aloud. Because of you, my daughter believes the law can see her too. Ava pressed the phone to her chest, tears pricking her eyes. Then I can't fail, she whispered. Later that night, Rosa arrived at Ava's door carrying a bag of takeout. You haven't eaten all day, Rosa said firmly. Ava allowed a faint smile. I forgot what food is. They sat at the table, steam rising from the cartons. For a while, neither spoke, the silence broken only by the sound of rain against the window. Finally, Rosa said, Tomorrow isn't just about Marcus. It's about proving the system can still work. You've carried this alone, but the whole city is carrying it with you now. Ava nodded slowly. That's what scares me. If I falter, I don't just lose a case. I lose their hope. Rosa reached across the table, squeezing her hand. Then don't falter. Marcus, unable to sleep, walked past the courthouse once more. The crowd was still there. Students bundled in blankets, families with children asleep on their shoulders, neighbors holding candles steady against the wind. He pulled out his mother's letter, reading it under the glow of a streetlight. The words steadied him as they always did. Promise me you'll make them answer. Marcus whispered, Tomorrow, Mom. Tomorrow they'll answer. Back in his dark house, Clifford tried calling old allies. Each call went unanswered. Each voicemail beep was another reminder of how far he had fallen. Finally, he set the phone down, staring at his reflection in the window. Tomorrow, he muttered bitterly. Tomorrow they'll regret making me the villain. But even he didn't believe it. His empire had crumbled, his allies vanished, his daughter unmoved. The only stage left for Clifford Hale was the silence he had created. As midnight passed, the city seemed to hold its breath. The courthouse stood silent, candles glowing like constellations at its base. Ava lay awake in her apartment, robe hanging in the corner, notebook on the table. Marcus sat on his couch, letter in hand, eyes closed but unyielding. Clifford slumped in his chair, glass empty, staring at shadows that no longer listened. 3 lives intertwined, 3 weights pressing down, 3 truths waiting to be spoken. When dawn came, the crowd outside had not left. They were still there, tired, cold, but unbroken. The sunrise painted the courthouse in gold, the candles flickering against the morning light. Inside, Ava rose, slipping into her robe. She stood before the mirror, taking one last steadying breath. Justice does not pause for bloodlines, she whispered, and with that she stepped out the door, ready to deliver a verdict that would echo far beyond the walls of her court. The courthouse was silent, though every seat was filled. Outside, thousands pressed against barricades, their candles replaced by daylight, their chants hushed to a low murmur. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Judge Ava Hale entered the courtroom, her robe flowing behind her. Rosa called, All rise! The gallery stood, the weight of the moment sinking into their bones. Ava's gavel cracked once, sharp and clear. This court is in session. We are here to deliver judgment in Reed versus Westfield development. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table, his mother's letter in his pocket. He closed his eyes, whispering to himself, This is for you, Mom. Clifford slumped at the defense table, his suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. Yet even now, his jaw was set in defiance, as though sheer arrogance could bend the world one more time. Ava's voice was steady, though inside her heart pounded. This case was brought by Marcus Reed on behalf of his late mother, Clara Reed. The evidence has shown beyond doubt that Clara Reed's garden was not weeds, but a livelihood. It provided food, income, and dignity to her and her community. The destruction of that garden was not accidental. It was an act of disregard by those who valued contracts over people. She paused, her gaze sweeping the gallery. The silence was absolute. The defense attempted to undermine this truth but failed. Testimonies, records, and reports all confirm Clara Reed's contribution to her neighborhood. The evidence is clear. Her gavel tapped lightly, punctuating the words. Therefore, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Marcus Reed. The gallery erupted. Cheers, sobs, applause. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing. Outside, the roar of thousands rose like a wave, flooding the courthouse with sound. Marcus bowed his head, tears streaming silently. Maya clutched his hand, whispering, "She's smiling right now. I know she is." He pulled the letter from his pocket, pressing it to his chest. "Promise kept, Mom." At the defense table, Clifford shot to his feet, voice cracking with rage. "No, this is rigged. My daughter betrayed me. She destroyed me." The bailiff moved quickly, but Clifford wasn't fighting anymore. His voice was broken, his words hollow. "You were supposed to be me, Ava. You were supposed to carry my name." Ava met his gaze, her eyes steady, her voice firm. "I carried the law, Father, and the law does not bow to names." Her gavel fell. Order restored. Clifford sank back into his chair, the fight draining from him at last. For the first time, he looked small, not powerful, a relic of arrogance finally silenced. After the ruling, Ava addressed the court one last time. "This verdict is not just for Clara Reed. It is for everyone who believes the law belongs only to the powerful. Let this case prove otherwise. Justice does not pause for bloodlines, and dignity is not measured by wealth. It is measured by truth." The gallery rose to its feet, applause echoing against the stone walls. Outside, the cheers thundered, shaking the very steps of the courthouse. Reporters rushed Marcus as he exited. "Mr. Reed, what does this verdict mean to you?" Marcus wiped his eyes, his voice steady. "It means my mother mattered. It means promises matter. And it means the law belongs to all of us." His words replayed on every channel, etched into headlines. "Reed, my mother mattered." That evening, the vigil transformed into celebration. Candles still burned, but now they mingled with music, with laughter, with tears of relief. Families embraced, strangers danced, voices rose in harmony. Justice does not pause for bloodlines. Marcus stood among them, holding his candle high. He felt lighter than he had in years, though the promise he carried would never truly leave him. Maya whispered, "It's over." Marcus shook his head gently. "It's not over. It's the beginning. For all of us." In her chambers, Ava removed her robe, setting it gently on the chair. She opened her mother's notebook one last time, tracing the words with her finger. "Justice is not about who you love or who you fear. It is about what is right when both are tested." She whispered, "I did what was right." For the first time, the robe felt lighter. And in a darkened house across town, Clifford sat alone. The phone was silent, the house empty. He stared at his reflection in the window, the roar of celebration faint in the distance. His empire was gone, his voice ignored, his name stripped of its shield. He whispered, "She ended me." But deep down, he knew. He had ended himself. The city, however, was alive. The verdict echoed far beyond the courthouse, into homes, schools, and hearts. A promise had been kept, a voice had been heard. And as night fell, the chant carried on the wind, steady and unbroken. Justice does not pause for bloodlines.